Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on political geography, today we would be talking on space and territory. And for this very discussion, we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Krishnendra Meena. Dr. Krishnendra Meena is Assistant Professor in Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, JNU. So let's welcome Dr. Krishnendra Meena and let's try to gather more and more of information through him. So let's welcome Dr. Krishnendra Meena. Hello sir, welcome to the reset lecture.
Thank you, Geetika. Good afternoon, students. It is a pleasure again to be addressing you through this very important medium. And today we'll focus on, within the political geography realm, we'll focus on two very important concepts which are central to not only to political geography but human geography and geography in general. That is space, which forms the key concept in political geography, and a related one, territory. So those two concepts will be the object of discussion today. We'll cover them one by one, and then we'll try to look at the linkages that there are between these two concepts. And then space is, as we know, it's a key topic of geography. The discipline of geography actually derives its sustenance, or one can say derives its existence from this very concept of space. On the other hand, it also provides the unifying focus for the field of geography in general. Geography is identified with the concept of space and vice versa. The concept of space lends credibility to the field of geography, be it physical geography, human geography, within that economic geography, cultural geography, political geography, all social geography, cultural geography, all branches of geography have a significant imprint of the concept of space. And that is what we are trying to understand today. And one should also understand that it is a very difficult concept to define in general. One cannot bring up or come up with definitions very easily, but has to concentrate or actually has to look at a larger canvas of other related fields of social sciences and humanities to understand the concept of space. And therefore it is very difficult to define. It cannot be defined only on the basis of geography, but it needs the support, the definition needs the support of various other disciplines in humanities and social sciences. And because geographers have been emphasizing on this term since the inception of the field itself, since the inception of the field of geography itself, which looks at Earth as the home of man, and because geographers treat Earth as their home, plus they also treat the Earth as a subject of their analysis. So within that, space forms the most important concept to understand. However, it is very difficult to define. Let us make an attempt to understand this concept, very important concept. Before we come to the geographical aspects of space, of the concept of space, let us ask ourselves a few philosophical questions which actually will set the tone for today's lecture. We should know that it is very common to talk about space in general in normal parlance about any bounded area as space, or a particular space of a nation, particular space where a university is located, or a company or a factory is located, or where some offices are located. So in normal parlance, in common parlance, we use the term very, very easily. But then we do not ask ourselves these very, very philosophical questions while trying to understand the concept of, while trying to understand what we are doing and how space is impacting us. So these four questions form the basis for analysis of the concept of space. So the first question is that do we experience in space or we experience space? And it's a very tricky question to answer, but we it is true both ways. We experience in space because we as humans experience things in an environment around us, which is certainly space. There is a space around us, there is a certain place, it is a room, it is a larger factory, it may be a larger district, or it may be another administrative unit, maybe a state, province. Furthermore, one can move on to the level of the nation. We experience in particular space, but simultaneously we also experience space, because the things around us have an impact on us, and the space around us has an impact on us. It is a two-way relationship between the observer, or who is within the space, who is experiencing space, as well as who is experiencing in space. That has to be understood fundamentally to understand fundamentally the concept of space. The next important question is, what is the distinction between space and place? Because we need to underline this distinction very clear also, make this distinction very clear also, because space, again, one can talk of space as any bounded area, or even if it is not bounded, an area, a territory. So in that context we can speak of space, or the larger space we can also speak of. But a place, on the other hand, is a point within the larger space. So if we take our unit of analysis at the spatial level, or as space, as say a province, then a city would be a place. Within the city, another small locality will be a place. So the place is a smaller entity within larger spaces. That is how we should understand space and place. The third important question is, what is the relationship between space and time? They have a very deep relationship, because most of the experiences we have, or all the experiences we cannot have without time. All the experiences have a chronological dimension. To evidence our presence in space, we also need the support of time. And it is on a different level one can understand that spaces change over time. No particular space remains the same over a period of time. There are a lot of elements which may be physical elements, or there may be some other elements, human elements, or some man-made elements, artificial improvements may be made in the space, but it does not remain same. Over time it changes. That aspect has to be brought into while answering this philosophical question, we need to understand that space and time have a relationship wherein time plays a critical role in changing the space, or in transforming the space, in transformation of a particular space. The last question, to which even scientists are looking for an answer, is that, is the world in space, or is space in the world? So in this question, it is also a very difficult thing to understand that what is a world for a human being, or difficult to define what is the world for a human being. So while trying to define another difficult concept, we grapple with one more difficult concept, or that is of the world. But nonetheless, it is commonly understood that any space which can be visualized by an individual is the world to that particular individual. So each of us have our own world, and which is located in the larger space, and on the other hand, vice versa is also true. We also have our space in this world. So this, but even after going through these 4 questions, or trying to answer these questions, we cannot arrive at a concrete definition of space. Let us move further. If we can come across a definition or some other forms of, or can we arrive at a definition, we should look into it. We should try at least, and for that we will take the help of a few very important geographers who have made geography very popular, who have been contributing to geography for a long time. Let us begin with begin with a very important aspect of definitions of space, that space cannot be understood in a singular definition. Space has to be understood in a trilogy according to David Harvey. And because for people, for individuals, space means different things. A space could be constituting different things for two different individuals, different people. That's why we should understand that within one individual definition it is difficult to cover, but nonetheless he has tried to make sense of the concept of space with three related dimensions within this larger definition of space. He argues that the first important definition, or the first important aspect of a definition of space, is that it is an absolute, and it is understood as a geometrical system of organization, usually through the Euclidean geometry with the three-dimensional connotations, that is x, y and z dimensions, in which people and objects are located and move through. So, that is a simple geometric understanding of space, wherein you can divide a certain portion of land surface or the earth surface, or even within the larger space we can divide a particular part into certain dimensions, and we can call that as space. That space can be observed through its dimensions by providing it with say x is the length and y is the width and height is z, and so on. We can keep on, we can actually come to the definition of that space. One can understand through a very simple example of a room. A room has a certain length, has a certain height, and it has a certain breadth or width. So, these and through that one can understand that is this the volume of that particular room can also be established. So, that is an absolute understanding of space. The second understanding is that of relative space, and this relative understanding of space is in it is partially dependent on the relations to objects, as it is a positional quality of a world of material things. So, one should understand this space, in terms of relative space. It has to be understood that it is a positional quality of a world of material things. It can be understood only in relation to other spaces, or in relation to its position vis-a-vis other spaces, in relation to the objects which it contains within itself, right? And through that we can also because for one particular person that same space could mean differently, whereas it may have a different connotation for other individuals. So, it can be based on the challenging fixed geometries of space, by saying that to me this space, the same room which looks only as a room to certain people, may look like a classroom to some other people, a lecture theatre to some other, and that's how we can make these distinctions, and that in that sense becomes a relative space. In this understanding of space, in this conceptualization of space, perspective plays a very, very important role. How do we perceive things which are there in space? That is the most important aspect to understand in relative connotations of space. The third dimension, or the third understanding of space is a development over absolute and relative conceptions. In this sense, space is relational because objects exist only as a system of relationships to other objects. So, one can establish a particular space only as a system of relationships to other objects. It is not in isolation, it is not just because there is a relationship, it is a whole system of relationships which defines a particular place as a space. Space thus is a system of interrelations as constituted by them. Space is multiplicity, space is heterogeneous and plural, right? So, this aspect has to be understood. It is the interrelations, it is the relationships within of objects which form a system that actually lends this substance, this credence, this content to this space. That is most important here, and therefore, because it is a system of relationships, it is a multiplicity. There can be multiple understandings of this particular space. It is heterogeneous. It can be interpreted differently by different people. It looks differently to different people, and therefore plural. There can be different kinds of spaces. That is the threefold understanding or trialogical understanding which David Harvey provides us. David Harvey is one of the foremost geographers currently in the field, in academia, and that is, and further he elaborates that because it is a multiplicity, because it is heterogeneous, because it is plural, because it is a system of relationships which are very, very dynamic, which are not static, which we should not understand space as static, but we should understand that it is always in transformation, always changing. That makes us understand that it is a dynamic, very dynamic concept, and it is always in the process of making. It is never finished or closed. Now we'll move to another scholar's definitions about space, about the same concept, and he also provides a trilogy to understand the concept of space or to conceptualize space. Within that, we can understand that he argues again, but if one were to look at commonalities between these two definitions, or between these two attempts to define space, we'll find that it is there are some similarities, there are some concurrences between these two definitions. We'll cover them when we speak about these three important conceptualizations by Henri Lefebvre, who was a French sociologist. So, as I have been saying, that all people from all disciplines, or scholars from most of the disciplines in humanities have contributed to the understanding of space. We should gladly accept this definition of space by a sociologist also, in a French sociologist called Henri Lefebvre. So, he argues that in the first part there are spatial practices which refer to the processes, flows, movements and behaviors of people and things that can be perceived in the world. So, what is important for him is that there are spatial practices. So, there are processes which have spatial dimensions, which have deep linkages to space. There are flows which flows most of the times are or in fact always can be located within space, because movements happen from one point to another, and behaviors of people are also conditioned by the larger ambit of space. So, within that all these spatial practices are happening because there is this larger space, and all these processes, flows, movements and behaviors of people form these spatial practices. And this is the first aspect of his definition. He refers to all the practices which happen within space. The second aspect is representations of space. This is very important to understand because it refers to conceptualized space, to the space constructed by professionals and technocrats. So, he says that planners, engineers, developers, urbanists, architects, geographers and other people, other scholars of scientific inclination or academic inclination, all represent space according to their own understanding or on the basis of their own experiences, on their own training, basis of their training as different types of professionals. So, a planner would interpret a particular space in a different way, he would represent the same space in a different way, an architect would be doing it in a different way, whereas an engineer would be looking at the same piece of space, same surface area in a different way, or he will also represent the same in a different manner. Developers look at them in a different manner. Geographers look at them or represent the same space in a different manner. So it is open for all to interpretations, and that is very interesting to understand. The third kind he argues is representational space, which he says that it is a space of representations which is directly lived in space, the space of everyday experience, the way we as human beings or from the animal world interact with a particular space, with our own immediate space, is the representational space. That is the space of representations. We are constantly interacting with a particular space. It is and we are experiencing the space, that particular space. We are interacting with it. We are constantly negotiating with it and moving through it. So that experience, or that the space of immediate experience and everyday experience forms the representational space. It is experienced through complex symbols, he argues, and images of its inhabitants and users, and overlays physical space, making symbolic use of its objects, and it is produced by people in every day. This representational part of space brings us to very important realization that space is a socially constructed concept. Spaces are socially constructed. It is not just that spaces are there and we live on them, or we are interacting with a physical space, but through our language, through our discourses, we are also making difference to, or we are also constructing simultaneously this space. And we also make different symbols to understand that particular to these spaces, and this is produced by people in everyday practice. This space, we should further understand that shapes our geographical imaginations as well as our sociological imaginations, be it the imaginations of our immediate surroundings, be it the imaginations of our larger world, or our own international neighborhood, domestic or neighborhood in not only in the international neighborhood but also neighborhoods within a particular city. These imaginations are totally shaped by our perceptions of space. How do we interact with particular spaces? So one can try the same at home by trying to look at or trying to create a map on a white piece of paper, on a blank paper, of your immediate surroundings. You can think in your mind that you want to create a map of your of the locality in which you live, or a larger district in which you live, and then just through your imaginations you can try to create that map, and then go and try to match it with maps which are provided in atlases, or maps which are provided by the municipal corporations or municipal bodies. I think there will be a lot of difference, because your imagination of that particular space is totally different than what it is there. And similarly, our sociological imaginations are also shaped by by our presence in that particular space. We will begin before we begin with the concept of territory. Let us try to focus more on these imaginations, and let us try to bring in some hard concepts of geopolitics, which were also geographical imaginations, which were arrived at by a few by the pioneers in the field of political geography. So there was Friedrich Ragel, considered the father of modern political geography, who was instrumental in understanding who actually laid down the laws of spatial growth of states. So he argued that states want to live in a particular space, they live like organisms, and their survival depends on the living space they occupy on this earth's surface. So those kinds of understandings. Furthermore, we can see that the focus of geopolitical thinkers or geostrategists like Mackinder was the earth's surface or space, in which they argued that certain spaces on the planet are more important than others because of their strategic value. And these were their particular geographical and geopolitical imaginations of these individuals. Because they were located in these particular situations, they were located in particular part of the world, they could visualize the world in a particular manner. And the impact of space was evident in the sense that their geopolitical imaginations were a product of their spatial location. These imaginations have formed a very, very important aspect in political geography, and they have made a very important contribution to the field of political geography in general. But nonetheless, we can critique all these understandings of space, of the global space, on the premise that they were products of their these were imaginations which are products of their locations, of their authors in a particular context, not only particular geographical context but also historical and sociological context of the globe at that point. And we can talk about more geopolitical imaginations and geographical imaginations which are based on these individual conceptualizations of space, but they were arriving at global strategies through those individual generalizations. That's where the fault was. And furthermore, their spaces, their understanding of space had a deep imprint of also the technical and territorial circumstances in which they were living, in the sense that the technology available to them to traverse certain distances was limited, which was hindered by, say, in the case of Mackinder, it was he argued that the railroads were the best technology available. So through that, we can arrive at this conclusion of having the heartland as the most important space on the planet. And for Mahan, the oceanic space was very important, whereas and this oceanic space, he argued that makes a very, very important aspect of the international system. And so the whole point is to argue that space played a critical role in understanding or in the creation of these geopolitical and geographical imaginations. Thank you. Welcome friends once again. Now we should look at the very important concept of territory, which forms the backbone of the field of political geography. We should begin with the etymology of the term territory itself. The term comes from the Latin word territorium, which meant the land around a town, and it also derives from terra, or land in general. Terra means land, earth, nourishment or sustenance. It conveys the sense of a sustaining medium, solid, fading off into indefiniteness. So in general, terra is the formative word or the most important background to the term territory. We'll come to the deep definitions of territory later on, but we'll begin with what does the precursors of this term mean. The form of the word, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, suggests that it derives from terror, which means to frighten or to terrorize, and territorium is a place from which people are warned. Perhaps these two contending derivations continue to occupy a territory today also. The concept of territory today, to occupy a territory is to receive sustenance and to exercise violence. Territory is land occupied by violence. That is what one of the important scholars on territory, William Connolly, had to say. But the important aspect is again here is that any space which has been imbued with power becomes territory, and that is the formative, that is the most important defining aspect of the concept of territory, and we will speak about the same in detail during the next 30 minutes, and we will try to understand what does territory mean, what does territoriality mean. We will also try to understand what does human territoriality mean, as different from territory for animals. So, we can safely understand that it is a bounded social space that inscribes a certain sort of meaning onto defined segments of the world, of the material world. So, the most important aspect about territory that it is a bounded space, and the second part is that it is social. So, these two aspects within this particular definition make us understand that there is an important aspect of society and of boundedness of space which is there in territory, and through that a lot of, if we look around us, we will find that there are a number of defined segments of the world on the earth's surface, which marks a differentiation between an inside and outside. Once you define a particular territory through a marker, that marker could be a wall, a line, a border post, a small fence, a hedge, all that is marking a differentiation between an inside and an outside. That is what territory does. The concept of territory does. It defines people according to space, according to their location in space. The basics of territory then are fairly straightforward. That is a space, a line, some meaning, some state of affairs. The moment we divide, we are dividing a space. The line may be a dividing line. It is a dividing line. We provide meaning to the space which is inside, which is on one side of the line and which is on the other side of the line. So, the creation of self and other is also a process which is arrived through territory, and this also indicates that there is a state of affairs which is existing, because we have made that distinction through creation of this bounded space which is called territory. Territoriality, on the other hand, refers more to the relationship between territories and some other social phenomena. It draws attention to the territorial aspects, conditions or implications of something else. So, within territoriality, what is more important is not territory itself, but it is its relationship with some other social phenomena. So, one can define that this particular space has this kind of territoriality with reference to a particular social phenomena. It draws attention to the territorial aspects, conditions or implications of something else. So, it is not speaking about territory, but it speaks about what is there in the territory or what relationships this territory occupies. So, the territoriality of state authority focuses on the spatial aspect of formal political power, which can be explained simply as the fact that a bounded state space clearly defines the spatial aspect of the political power which the state has. So, it is apart from defining the state geographically, it also defines the area where the political power of this particular state operates, or where this state is sovereign. One can further look at it, relational territoriality of institutions, that is, schools are defined territorially, prisons, hospitals, they have a different, all of them have a different kind of territoriality. Of organizations, corporations, military, religions, all of them have territoriality. Of activities, child's play, money laundering has a different territoriality, which is illegal territoriality, which is cross-border money laundering. Drug use again is illegal territoriality, or of aspects of identity or social being. Our identities are many times defined through territory. How often we come across the term in the context of our own society, the terms like Gujarati, the terms like Bihari. So they all denote people coming from a particular territory, and that territoriality of that person being born or being being an inhabitant of that particular part of the territory forms this territoriality for that particular person. And also this shift from territory to territoriality brings different relationships more clearly into view. If we shift the focus from territory to these aspects of territoriality, we also focus more on the relationships part rather than focusing on the territory part itself or the spatial aspect itself. But when we fix our gaze on territoriality, we shift to the relationships which are there in that particular space, in that particular territory. And then we can also move another related shift from nouns to the verb forms derived from territory to bring social practices and processes more clearly into view. Let us look at what these verb forms are. A shift from territoriality brings as different relationships more clearly into view, and in recent years a number of scholars have written about the deterritorialization or reterritorialization of state power under conditions of globalization. So these verb forms of territory, that is deterritorialization, within which a process as well as a social practice is involved, need to be understood more carefully in the context of globalization. So when the current phase of globalization or neoliberal global capitalism began after the disintegration of Soviet Union, and also the capitalism, the idea of capitalism or the larger canvas of capitalism remaining the only economic reality on the global system, then people argued that this phase of globalization would bring about deterritorialization in the global system, which meant that there will be only a few borders left, or the world will become borderless. Those were the kinds of arguments advanced, and it was argued that territory therefore will be rendered irrelevant or redundant, and that is, this process was named then as deterritorialization. On the other hand, what we witnessed a few years after the advent of this phase of globalization, that is what we are witnessing now, is reterritorialization of state spaces in the international system. Borders are becoming harder and harder. So that at the level of the state indicates, or at the level of the nation states indicates, that there is a reterritorialization going on in the international systems. More and more states are opting for hard borders. Even very liberal organizations which are considered to be the epitomes of liberalization, like European Union, are now having very hard borders at the end of the territory of the European Union itself. So the region, European Union, is now adopting very hard borders at the edge of this larger region. Even there have been now calls about building more walls around the planet, And in fact, it is, according to one survey, more and more walls have come up during the last 10 or 15 years. So, all this talk of deterritorialization is now past and or now has become irrelevant or has lost its relevance. On the other hand, reterritorialization is more has become more and more prominent. These verb forms draw our attention, like territorialization and reterritorialization, draw our attention to territoriality as an activity and to territories as the products of social practices and processes. And as transitive verbs, they imply objects. But our focus here is on the practices and processes. That is how we should understand territoriality, human territoriality, territory should be understood within these processes and practices. Let us look at human territoriality more deeply, and we will find some more important qualifying aspects or more important conditions which can be embedded upon the concept of territoriality. So, according to Robert de Sack, who devised a definition in 1981, he argued that human territoriality can be understood as an attempt to affect, influence or control actions and interactions of people, things and relationships by asserting and attempting to enforce control over a geographic area. So, within this definition we see the implication is that power plays an important role or politics plays an important role. The space, any geographic area lying unused, lying vacant can be a territory, but it becomes territorial, it acquires a territoriality when there is an attempt, when there is power involved or when there is an attempt to affect, influence or control actions and interactions of people, things and relationships by asserting and attempting to enforce control over this particular geographic area. So, area becomes territory when there is this element of power into it or infused into it. This definition further implies whether such attempts are made by individuals or by groups, and it applies at any scale from the room to the international arena. This definition can be applied to all or aspects of international system, to the local level, to the global level. At all scales, this definition of territoriality will be applicable. That is what Robert Sack argues. And but the most important aspect here is the importance of power or the importance of politics, which makes any geographic area as a territory, which creates, power is the defining element or transformative element which metamorphoses any geographic area into territory. Further, he explains, this is Robert de Sack's definition of explanation of this definition. He argues that the most commonly accepted definition of territoriality is defense of area. So, the individual is expected to be in the area which he or she is supposed to defend, and this defending this area is presented as a goal in itself or as a means to such specific ends as control of population density, control of food resources or assertion of dominance. So, this definition again is very relevant to understand state territoriality, because states formulate their laws, their decrees on the basis of which are applicable over a geographic area, which are applicable over a particular area. The states define their area of work on the basis of territory, and they function on a particular area. They implement all the policies, whether they may be about population density, their military policies, or their assertion of use of different forces, different kinds of forces, their assertion, their setting up of more and more economic opportunities or factories, industrialization, urbanization, all of it is done on the basis of territory, on the basis of a bounded space of that particular state, which is called the state territory. Further, territoriality is an extension of action by contact. It is a strategy to establish differential access to people, things and relationships. And it should be understood that through territoriality one can facilitate differential access to people, things and relationships. So, for example, one particular area may be accessible to one group of people, but the same may not be accessible to another group of people. That is why we see a lot of symbols and signages around various buildings where we say that no trespassing or trespassers will be prosecuted, which is or sometimes it is written that only authorized personnel are allowed. So, that is a different way to communicate territoriality, and it allows us to create these differences, allows us to create these relationships or differential access to things and relationships and people. And its alternative to this territoriality is non-territorial action. Through our non-territorial actions, like just by telling people that this area is and you should not access this particular area, we can bar people from entering that particular area. Furthermore, passes or identity cards or some badges may be provided for people who can enter a particular area. So, it creates this differential access. This geographic area can refer to either fixed or portable areas, and one does not have to be in the territory to assert control over it. For example, just by locking a particular automobile, we can actually enforce access to it, non-access to it. We can deny access to it to people other than yourself. And this automobile, of course, is a portable area. So, it is also applicable to portable areas. There are in many parts of the world there are people living in caravans, which are automobiles fitted, huge vehicles fitted with all the amenities of a house, right. So, that is how they and they are also portable. They can be carried, they can be moved from one place to another. So, territoriality can be established on a geographic area which is portable. But to back territoriality, there has to be non-territoriality also. It is required to back up territoriality, as has been emphasized earlier also, that to enforce territoriality or to enforce territorial decrees, we need non-territorial actions. We have to communicate our understandings about a particular territory through either through verbal decrees or through documents which are there, through signages, that those non-territorial actions have to be there to back up territoriality. Territoriality, by territoriality we here mean that not only by creating a bounded space, by creating a wall, small wall or a fence, that does not suffice. So, non-territorial actions like creating signages, issuing decrees, by making statements, we have to back that up to keep that space out of bounds for certain people. Territoriality is not simply the circumscription of things in space. It is not equal to a region or area or territory in the old sense. It is circumscription with the intent to influence, affect or control. It is one must understand that it is not simply creating these barriers. It is not only a region, it is not any area or territory in the old sense, but it requires the assertion of control. The element of power has to be there, the element of influence to affect relationships and people and things, affect relationships between people and things or between people. That assertion has to be there. that idea to control this should be there to understand territoriality, to make for territoriality. Territoriality includes those things, the assertion of control and to the idea to affect or influence things within a particular space. One also must understand that there can be degrees of territorializing. By that we mean that a maximum security prison is more territorial than a halfway house, and a closed classroom is more territorial than an open one. So we clearly understand that a prison is very, very territorial in nature, whereas same cannot be said of in the same category which is the house arrest, or we cannot say the same of institutions which other institutions like say an institute for family welfare, for example, or any institute which studies say statistics, or which is or a school. They are less territorial, and a closed classroom of course is more territorial than an open one. There are numerous ways in which territoriality can be asserted, including legal rights to property in land and cultural norms and prohibitions about uses of areas. If we look at in the countryside, in the rural parts of our country, you'll see that certain areas are designated as areas for they are grasslands meant for grazing of sheep or grazing of cattle. So by convention they are the areas meant for shepherding, or they are areas meant for animals to graze, right? And this through some cultural norms we follow, and prohibitions we follow those traditions, and we keep on enforcing that territoriality. Territoriality occurs at all scales, from the room to the nation state. So there can be a territoriality of a particular village panchayat in the Indian context. We can go further at the tehsil level, we can go to the subdivisional level, at the district level, then we have divisions within particular states, then we further can move on to the provinces or the state level, that is another administrative division. Then we can move on to the larger national level or nation state level. Further, these nation states combine to form regions. So that can be another, and the highest scale is that of international or the global scale. So it can be understood at various scales, territoriality in that sense. Territories most often occur hierarchically and are part of complex hierarchical organizations. So they are territoriality is also hierarchical in nature, very, very hierarchical in nature. So as I have just listed the administrative divisions, these divisions are also forming an administrative hierarchy between different within this large pattern. So this system of hierarchy operates from top to bottom for implementation of policies or for implementation of programs of central government or through the state governments. There needs to be a hierarchy which is followed. Furthermore, if we consider territoriality as a strategy for differential access, this avoids the use of whether territoriality is an instinct. So we can move away from human instincts if we were to look at territoriality through a strategic perspective. And when we are arguing that strategy, through the use of this strategy, we are trying to make a case wherein we say that we do not need to look at territoriality as an instinct, but we say that it is a planned strategy to allow access to some people, things and goods to this territory, and it is a planned strategy to avoid some undesirable. So that is how the states also operate in the international context. The whole idea of geoeconomics is based on territoriality. States function as unit economies on the basis of territoriality. So a different set of laws operates, and different kinds of tariffs or levies are levied for the import of goods from different parts of the world on the basis of these goods entering a territory of this particular state. So that there are territorial markers which define how much the goods are going to cost. And this definition of territoriality further cuts across perspectives and levels of analysis. It involves the perspectives of those controlled and those doing the controlling, whether they be groups or individuals. So again, we must reiterate that the defining aspect of territoriality is control, and there may be groups which are doing the controlling, and there are groups which are being controlled. So these are the two most important aspects of territoriality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. And dear friends, we believe that the lectures which are organized for you are beneficial for you. If you want to give a feedback for this particular lecture, you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. This lecture is going to be uploaded on YouTube soon. Keep watching us, keep writing us. We would be meeting again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.